Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Raising Child Care Fund, which is a project of the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative webinar on growing power and capacity with parents and providers. Hi, I'm Rachel Schumacher. I'm the director of the Raising Child Care Fund. It is my job to welcome you here today for what is going to be a fun, informative, and creative conversation, and you'll see later why I said creative, with being hosted by April Lung, who is a program associate for the Raising Childcare Fund and Early Childhood Funders Collaborative, and with three wonderful Raising Childcare Fund grantees um, and partners, like we like to call them. And we are excited today to get started and to go through some good information together. We are so excited to say the Raising Childcare Fund is a pooled fund that's been around for 6 years. So I'm going to do that welcome and a little bit of overview to what we are and what we do and what we've learned, because today we are also soft releasing and releasing our 6th year, our report on what we've been doing in the last set of years. Um, we will then have a facilitated conversation. That'll be the bulk of the conversation. And we really want to have some interaction. So go ahead and use the chat and put in any questions you have. And I'll be trying to moderate that, make sure that you get them answered. And we are very excited to have you all here today. So, what is the Raising Childcare Fund? So, many of you already know this, and if you don't, let me just do a quick overview. We are a pooled fund. Early Childhood Funder Collaborative is our host, and we have been doing this. Made our first grant since 2019. Um, our commitment from the very beginning has been lifting voices, building power, and expanding equity in childcare and other systems for children and families. Our approach is trust-based philanthropy, and let me tell you a little bit more about what that is on our next slide. We are all committed, all the funders who put resources into this pooled fund are committed to these principles. And that means we are always thinking about ourselves, not necessarily as the center or the expert at all. We really are working for systemic equity, and we are modeling it by redistributing power, sharing governance and roles in terms of how to make decisions in the Raising Childcare Fund, centering relationships, partnering in the spirit of service, being transparent with our grantee partners and accountable to them, and embracing learning. And this is a great opportunity today for us to be learning together. We always say we learn most of everything we learned. You know how some people say, I learned everything I needed to know in kindergarten. We've learned everything we've needed to know by really listening to our grantee partners. We have grown since 2019 to now reach grantees in 19 states and the District of Columbia. And we are very proud to have welcomed 3 new partners in the last year. You can see them on the bottom: Maine, Utah, and Virginia. As long as we are able to continue to fund our grantee partners with robust multi-year grants that are general operating, we pledge to do that. So that is part of what we have learned through this process about how important it is to make a collective impact. The other thing that we wanted to share with you today, and you would read more about in our report, is data that we've been able to collect for the first time in 2024 from the grantees we had at that point. As I mentioned, we had 3 that are new. So next year we'll get to report on Maine, Utah, and Virginia. We are able to we worked with our grantee partners to figure out what is a meaningful measure of what you do. And they helped us craft these measures. We've reached over 800,000 people. Our grantee partners have reached over 800,000 people just in the last year. They have at least 64 FTEs who are organizing for childcare justice in all these states. We have people who are joining and actually taking actions online or in person, 16,000 people in 2024. And in all of our state partnerships, our grantees are leading organizing and advocacy strategy in their state or co-leaders in a coalition of groups or campaign that's doing that. And they are also organizing on related issues, which I think is really important to understand. Organizing is not a single siloed issue. It is all about really reflecting what folks who are most impacted by these issues, like childcare, um, find important, which includes things like paid leave, economic and tax justice, racial equity, and voting rights. So our collective learning has been that all the things I just said to you, our model of grant making builds capacity, it supports organizers so that they can create impact, demonstrates the importance of staying the course over time, shares power, and also promotes funders as learners in the process. Don't take my word for it. We're about to hear from three of our amazing partners who are going to talk more about the 4 key pillars of organizing. And you can see them right here. I am going to actually turn it over to April, who will moderate and say a little bit more about these themes before going into our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Actually, you can take the slides down. We gave everybody a preview there of conversation because I would love to do introductions first. Well, hello, everyone. My name is April Leung. I'm on staff with ECFC and a part of the Raising Childcare Fund team. I get to work alongside our grantee partners weekly. And so this really is one of my favorite webinars of the year because we get to reflect and lift up on the amazing work that our RCCF grantee partners do every single day for children, families, providers, and communities. And we really wish that we could give every single one of our organizations and organizers an opportunity to meet everyone on this call. We actually did just get to meet a lot of them in person at our ECFC members meeting 2 weeks ago, did a little grantee convening and would love to share more about that. But for the sake of an hour Zoom webinar, we've brought together 3 grantee partners, all doing different yet similar things in 3 different states to support the broken childcare system. So this is a really unique opportunity and a privilege for all of us who have joined this call to get time with these very busy folks. So we welcome your engagement through the chat, the question and answer box, and we really hope that you've come to this call with kind of curiosity and a learning mindset. So I would love to invite each of our guests today to introduce yourself, your organization work, and something you're really proud of about your work that recently happened or is to come.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lorena Garcia. I am the CEO of the Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition. We are celebrating our 45th anniversary this year of being for and by, and definitely working to respond to community needs and allow ourselves to continue to center community voices to ensure that we have systemic change that allows all families to thrive. One of the things that I'm really proud of our work, especially right now, is given the state of where we are in our country, the chaos that is coming from the administration is intended to sow fear. But we recently did an organization-wide survey, and it turns out that about 85% of the participants that come through CSPC say they feel safe with us and they have courage when they are doing actions and they feel like it's a place where they want to be. And I think while I can highlight policy and policy successes, I think just the fact that we are able to create a space where community who is being attacked feels safe is probably the most impactful moment of pride for me right now.
Hey everyone, I'm Alexa Howard. I'm the co-executive director of Isaiah. Isaiah is a statewide, multiracial organization in the state of Minnesota. We work on multiple issues. We're sort of an organizing hub in the state for multiple different organizing projects. One of those that is near and dear to my heart, and that I spend quite a bit of time on, is called Kids Count on Us, which is a project of about 500 independent community-based childcare centers that organize together to raise wages and benefits for workers, to raise standards across the industry, to fight for more funding, and to make childcare more affordable for parents. And I would say, and Kids Count on Us has been around for 8 years now as part of Isaiah. And we had a really large day without childcare this year. We did ours in March because that is what made sense with our legislative timeline, although we also did an action with the National Day Without Childcare on Monday. But at our Day Without Childcare, we had 6 different actions around the state and had 2,500 people involved across those actions, which was the largest we've ever had in a really difficult time. But the thing I'm most proud of is we don't have 6 staff on Kids Count on Us. So in order to pull off 6 actions with centers closing down all across the state, it had to be almost entirely led by providers, teachers, and parents. And it was. And that is something that we're just incredibly proud of.
Hello, everybody. I am Tyrone Scott from First Up in the Philadelphia area. First Up is a holistic agency trying to make sure that basically kids have everything they need to succeed, starting in the early years. We do a couple of things, and I'll try to be fast on this because I know I'm being timed. We provide professional development for teachers because in our area, if you're in the K-12 system, there's a lot of professional development, but for those of us who work with children under the age of 5, it's really hard to find good quality professional development to increase your knowledge. So we do that both on kind of what we call one-off, like I just want to make my science center better. We have a training for that, all the way up to doing 4-credit college courses and the biggest conference in our area on early education. We also do one-on-one mentoring with teachers. So literally going into classrooms for a year or more, where you can have an expert teacher work with you to kind of observe what you're doing and give you advice. We have that. We also have our family outreach program, which really works with families on different things that they're identifying as things they want to work on, things like early literacy at home. One of our more unique places is our program we call Roots, which is a racial identity program, really helping parents of children with color help them not just be proud, but understand where they can get the education around their own culture sometimes that schools forget, including our early education places. And then working with the sites that those kids go to make sure that their culture is incorporated into their sites. And then lastly, what is my part of the organization is our advocacy department, which is really designed on trying, pretty much as everyone else said, to hear the voices of people who are using or providing early education and then saying, what is it that you need out of this system? And help them find ways to actually make that manifest. I will say that one of the things that we're very proud of here is just Monday on the Day Without Childcare, we had a pretty big rally in conjunction with some of our other friends in the area. And our city council committed to launching a commission on investigating what they can do for early education. The positive to that I want to mention is specifically in Philadelphia is the last time our city committed to that, we created the PHL pre-K program, which is our free pre-K program for 5,000 kids in the city. So typically when our city council does something, they at least give us something out of it. I'm very happy to say we're not a place that, or let's say we don't allow them to be a place where commissions just issue reports and say, well, this is bad and there's nothing we can do. So we're actually very hopeful that there will be some tangible action that comes out of it.
Amazing. Thank you to all 3 of you guys for sharing. I know that this room can already feel the energy and the excitement and want to learn more. So we are going to dive right into kind of just talking about the pillars of organizing. So when we were on a prep call with Alexa, Tyrone, and Lorena, they are so quick to teach us like, hey, we got an alliteration for you. Let's explain what organizing is to this group. Some of you, different varying levels of involvement in organizing, knowing about organizing, but this is the time where you get your notebooks out, you write this down, because if you're ever asked to explain it, you can refer to this alliteration that they came up with. So the key pillars, and Rachel, you can jump that slide up. The key pillars of organizing are being community driven, community led, courageous, and being creative. So our report gives amazing examples of some of these things, but I really would love for Alexa, Tyrone, and Lorna to share stories from their work that really illustrate what that means, to really identify what is organizing, how is that lived out in your organizations, with your communities. And this is going to be more of a dialogue. So yeah, we can start with Tyrone if you want to kick us off, and then we can kind of bounce off one another.
Sure. So I always like to start with creative, not because the other ones aren't important, but because I think that hopefully at this point in organizing and just even for new folks coming on board, we recognize the community has to lead and they have to drive the change. If it doesn't resonate with them, then the change is superficial and it's not going to be something that's really that they're going to get behind the fight for, and then it may not really be transformative the way we need it to be. So for me, I'm always trying to figure out what else can we do. One of the very unfortunate things of this field, and I'm afraid my other grantees will agree with me, but unfortunately, is that a lot of times you feel like you're putting off a lot of effort and you don't get as much change as you want. So we've always lived with the philosophy of, if you do the same thing over and over and expect different results, that's the definition of insanity. So we've become very creative. And one of the things that we discovered here in Pennsylvania is that our network of providers and parents have been petitioning our governor and trying to reach out to our governor, and we haven't gotten much out of it. So we decided to be more creative. We stopped reaching out to the governor as much, we still do, obviously, and started reaching out to chambers of commerce and started talking to them around the fact that the businesses in those chambers are reporting that they're having difficulty finding staff because people can't find childcare, and started what we call borrowing their power, because a lot of those are the big donors to our officials, and having them say, can you make this call? We'll give you the language, we'll do the research, we'll bring the stories, but if you make the call, it will be different. And what we got this year, instead of, and which we didn't see the last 3 years of our governor's administration, is he actually did put money in the budget for early education, specifically teacher retention bonuses, which is something that we've been asking for the last 3 years. So looking at just what else can you do, and if this tactic isn't working, how do we take the energy that we have and the knowledge that we have and use it in a different way? So I don't want to take up all the time, so I'll pause to see if any of my colleagues here have other things they want to add. But I've got lots of creative ideas.
Yeah, I want to maybe jump in a little bit and give a small brief explanation of the difference between community driven and community led. A lot of times we think those are the same thing, but they're really not, because when you think about being community driven, another way to phrase that is also maybe being community centered, and where the solutions come from community, the ideas come from community, you're being informed. And so that's what's giving you, it's like your map. But being community led is actually having your community members lead the work, similar to what Alexa was saying in her actions. What she was doing is that her staff couldn't do it all. So her leaders were actually leading the actions on that day. And the reason why those are both extremely important and they have to work together is because sometimes we see community leaders propped up to drive, like, maybe a board driven agenda instead of a community driven agenda. And so when you have both working together, then it's really a movement that is being born within community, that is coming from community, and that is being led by community. And so it's not enough to just do one, and all of those have to be done together. The way that we embody that at the Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition is our first and will always be our go-to for even just for our own staff hiring is directly from our community. We always hire from our participants, from those that are leading our actions. We hire directly from our community. And a lot of times that means that we're hiring, for example, folks that maybe are a lawyer in in Uruguay, but have never actually done community organizing here until they recognize I have to organize my community in order so that my kids get X, Y, and Z. And they've really, you know, they've risen to demonstrate that they're not only fantastic in leading, but they're motivating and people follow them. And then there's other times where we'll hire folks that maybe don't have necessarily the skill set yet, but we invest in that training, we invest in that support. And what it does, I think, going back to my initial opening, was it helps build trust. People and community trust their community. You know, we've seen how many of us have seen when other like nationwide organizations come and parachute into our communities and they try and do something big, and it's just like, what are you doing here? But the reality is that when you are what we call the not so secret sauce, is when you are led for and by those that you go to school with, those that you go to a grocery store with, those that you are next door neighbors with, those that you trust your kids with. And that's really how we embody the community driven and community led aspect of this.
This is so inspiring. There's two stories I want to tell. I'll keep them both short, as short as I can. So in 2023, some of you may have heard Minnesota had a pretty big year. It was the most historic legislative session we have had maybe ever in the state of Minnesota, one of the most historic in the country. And we had positioned childcare and care policies over the decade before this. And in that year, one, the creation of a Department of Children, Youth, and Families, which is a huge structural victory for folks in early childhood who had before had to work with 4 different departments and different people in each department, creating one place that was accountable to children and to early learning. We were able to win $1 billion of ongoing investment for childcare in the state of Minnesota, as well as compensation payments to continue the investment that the federal government had in early childhood educators. Our state was able to keep that going so that our teachers did not take a pay cut. And this year, we were a little bit blindsided by it, but it's a different legislative session, a different makeup of the legislature. And this year there was a proposal to cut those compensation payments by 10%. And we had an emergency meeting with all of our providers, and to the leader-led sort of category here, they came up with a plan and were able to collect letters from across the state, from providers, from teachers, and from parents, including in districts where their legislator was in favor of these cuts. And we had ally legislators, one in particular, in the state house, read these letters on the floor saying, your constituents are providing care maybe for your children right now, so they can't be here. But I have their words for you that they would like you to hear. And it was like read out loud and then like connected to, this is your constituent, this is your constituent, this is your constituent providing care for X number of children in your district right now, which had quite a bit of impact. And then the other sort of both creative, courageous, and community-led story is our state has not rewritten licensing standards for childcare for about 30 years. And last year, they released what they called a modernization of licensing standards. And when our childcare providers spent time digging into the proposals from the state to change licensing, they realized that it was pretty bad, that this was not going to actually improve licensing for them. It wasn't going to get them more face time with children. It was not prioritizing early childhood development or what was best for kids. And initially our providers had a sense of like, well, that sucks. We're being, screwed over yet again. It's going to be another 30 years of even worse licensing standards. Like, I'm going to have to close my doors. And we worked through rage, but also disappointment and despair. And said, well, what if we wrote the licensing standards for the state? What would it look like? And we started to imagine that. And then we built a campaign that the first step was to get the state to pause on their process of updating licensing, which they did. And then the second step was to put forward our own vision, which we have. And it has been making significant progress, and we feel hopeful that in the next couple of years we will have a early learning licensing vision and system that was written entirely by providers of early childhood, and that would be a very big deal in Minnesota.
Oh, I love this conversation because, and I'm so thankful, Lorna, for pointing out the difference between community driven and community led. Because when you look at this list, I mean, you're looking at your community members, you're like, you need to be all these things. But really, those top two ones are the things that we need to be for them. We need to be community driven minded. We need to put them first in order for them to be courageous, in order them to be creative, right? Like we can't have these expectations that they can just show up and do these things. So would love for you guys to speak on like what does it look like to care for your communities that have yet to step into this, or they are stepping into it. And so how do you support them in that?
I can jump in real quick and then pass it on. I mean, I think the main so to the story of the letters that came in to fight for the compensation payments, there's a woman, Lynn, who is a provider up in northern Minnesota, who said before she wrote this letter that was then read on the floor by her legislator, she didn't believe that she could do anything that would actually make a difference. And then she was emotional when she found out that her letter had been read and that it had an impact on a thing that she believed in. So I think part of organizing is what we call leadership development. All of us do this all of the time, but it is deeply believing that people are capable of so much, of incredibly hard things, of taking risks, of courageous things. And then, yes, providing training, but also it's like holding up a mirror of what we believe human beings, and in particular, I think for a lot of our organizing, women of color are capable of. And then creating the pathways for them to believe it themselves is really the heart of that. Yeah.
One of the things that we made sure to do is hold safe space for our community leaders, for themselves, and also for them to invite folks that wanted to understand what was happening. So we had a thing, the name has changed, but it started out as something called Concilio Comunitario, which is community council. And we started with this, like every 2 weeks, we'd get online, and it started through the pandemic, and we'd all just chat and we'd talk about what are the things happening. Every question that was asked, we would answer. More and more people kept showing up because it was a very low risk, but also high informative space. And it was it was a space where people could be like, I know I went to this thing, but I didn't feel comfortable talking because I didn't know what it meant, And so then, hold on, sorry. I'm actually using the space button instead of taking the effort to move my arm to the mouse to unclick mute. That's me being lazy right now. Sorry about that. So, I think there's a space around, like, as Alexa was mentioning, like building up and having that firm belief. And then there's also the space of, okay, now let's get together and talk through what in the world those acronyms meant. What is the process, And when I'm talking about training, I'm specifically talking about, like, how does policy be made? Where can you insert your voice? How do you find your legislator? How do you find your city council member? How do you call them? How do you, like, can you call them in your own language? Will it get translated? Like all the nuts and bolts of how do you actually do this work? Because so many times, it's the difference between like organizing broadly versus organizing deeply. And both are absolutely essential. Absolutely. And when you organize deeply is when you actually take the time to say, this is why we have to do these things. And this is the process. And there's 10 steps for a bill to become a law. And what are those? And then organizing broadly is when we send out those emails. click here to send an email to your legislator, make this phone call. And I think those are the things where we have to be able to inform our leaders, like, and help them also understand, like, you might start by being broadly organized and you're going to send 4 or 5 emails and we'll see that. And then it'll probably be something where one of our community leaders will be like, they want to do more. Great. Let's bring them in because now they are going to be organized deeply, you know, and I think that's something where it's just knowing where you're going to start, where's the intake of somebody, where are they going to enter your organization, how are you going to reach them, how are you going to find them at the laundromat, for example, and to what point and how are you going to move them through the steps as far as they want to go. You know, I think that's also important. We have this vision of we have to make everyone a leader, and everyone is in their own right, but it's not on us to force everyone to go through the same path and the same steps to become a leader as we define it. And so it's also about as creative as we can be and as flexible as we can be to make sure that all of our community leaders have the skill set and have the tools in order to lead their household, to lead their best friend, to lead their neighborhood in the best way they know how.
I think my two colleagues said pretty much everything. The one thing I'll just add is that to the point of knowing that leadership looks different and people have different paths and different places they want to go, one of the things that we try to do is talk to our current leaders about what are those things along the path? What are those things that are most comfortable for people? What made you most comfortable when you took that first step so that we can make sure we make those opportunities available? Because again, one of the things I say with, with the people I work with, I've been a first up for 20 years. A lot of this is second nature to me, and like saying, knowing the acronyms and knowing how a bill becomes a law and knowing this, that, and the other. If I am not speaking with the people who are just taking that journey, then I might mistakenly create a path for somebody that's just completely inappropriate. So really going back to our constituency, for lack of a better term, and saying, what should we be doing? How should we be helping people? What do they need to know? What opportunities do they want? And making sure that it's not about us from the quote unquote top down as the organizers, but really saying, again, being community led in the piece of how we lead the rest of the community. Because I really do think that's an important piece.
Thank you so much. Lorna, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just have one thing also. I think one thing that's been really clear for like that within my staff, as I mentioned, my staff is all from the communities that we organize. Even though now they have the badge that says community organizer, systemic change organizer, and they have their business cards, they refuse, which I love and I'm so grateful for. They're like, I am still community. And for some reason, we have this mentality that once you're a paid organizer, that you're no longer part of community, and that's false. That's just false. So when people are paid organizers that come from community, we also need to honor and respect that they are still community and their lived experience is also as important as the folks that they are gathering for a cafecito.
Yes, plus one to that. These conversations with you all are definitely one of my favorite conversations to have because all our heads are nodding. I can only imagine the room. If we saw everyone's faces, their heads would be nodding. So I said earlier that a big part of RCCF, and Rachel said this, is posturing ourselves in a position to listen and learn and asking a lot of questions. So this is my plug that there is a question and answer time in about 10 minutes. So fill that question and answer box with your questions and we'll sort through those. But before we get there, I do want to talk about what we talked about when we were together is this piece called co-strategizing. Co-strategizing with funders, co-strategizing with philanthropy, co-strategizing with all of you that are on this call that have come here today. And we don't want, the thing about RCCF is we don't want to make any decision without the guidance of our grantee partners. And I could name so many examples of that they have walked us through, the partner advisory, this webinar, our convening we just had. It's really helped shape our programming, but also just who we are. So we're super thankful. And in this process, we're not only building more trust with them, but we're creating space for our partners to be really transparent about the challenges that they're fighting for, and that they are calling us to action and telling us we need to stay the course with them, even after a huge win. So when we have our reports with them, we are intentional about like, what was really hard about this year? Or even if we're asking you, what was your win? like what happened after. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I want to turn it over to our partners to talk a little bit about the challenges they've faced or are facing quite literally today, and how they've utilized those challenges to push through with parents and providers. And I know right off the bat, Alexa, when we were doing our prep call, you were saying, Isaiah organized for 6 years for the Department of Youth and Families. And although it was a big win to form, it really is just the beginning of the work for all of you guys. So if you want to start with that and then talk about current challenges, like let this group of people know like what's actually going on, because all those stories amazing, but it comes with so much hardship and heartbreak, honestly. So yeah, take it away, Alexa.
Yeah, thank you for this. I really appreciate being able to talk about the challenges because there are many of them right now, and I think we should be in dialogue with one another about that. So April indicated this. I mean, one challenge is just the time horizon of this work. So ultimately, from my lens, in Minnesota with Kids Count on Us, like the transformation of the childcare industry is going to take a significant amount of power to change. Like the challenge is not that we need to make people care about kids. We should. But the challenge is it's a question of power. And the industry, the women who run it and who subsidize the industry through their labor, low paid labor, and in some cases for many of our providers, they don't bring home a paycheck month to month. So the question here is about power, how we're transforming the industry, and that takes time. So there could be like flashy wins that happen in a year or 2 years, but the sustained transformational organizing that goes from 50 people in a room deciding to start Kids Count on Us to 500 active centers, which is a pretty significant portion of the centers in Minnesota. That takes a lot of time. So our biggest structural win was creating this new department. It'll be, when it's all set up, the third largest department in the state. And that did take 6 years, and it took going from a governor's office that was initially unsure about the idea of a new department to exercising power, building a relationship, and a governor's office who then in 2023 wholeheartedly advanced the idea and declared that we were going to make Minnesota the best state to raise a kid. That took 6 years. That's not fast work. And then winning a new department begins the next decade of implementation of that department. So we learned very, very quickly after winning that implementation was a whole nother story, and that it requires constant vigilance, relationship building, navigating tension, and positioning ourselves. And so that is, that will be that is year after year of work. And then I want to name that the childcare industry, we often say it's a broken market. It's a broken industry. Parents can't afford to pay for childcare. The teachers are making minimum wage with no benefits, and the providers are not bringing home a paycheck themselves, and are on the edge of collapse. It's not a broken industry. It is a collapsing industry. We had three, I think it was 3 centers, like longtime centers in the city of St. Paul closed recently. So and we're headed into a time where nearly every state is going to be in a budget crisis because of cuts in the federal government. So even if in childcare we avoid federal cuts, our states are going to have to deal with billions of dollars of potential cuts. So as folks who work on childcare, I think a really big, and early learning, I think a very big challenge we have to start to wrestle with is, where is the money going to come from to not only avoid cuts, but to continue to fund childcare at higher and higher levels. And so we are taking very seriously the challenges of where and how do we raise revenue, and how do we build enough power to fight for that at the state level. There are many more challenges, but those are the ones I wanted to name. I'm sure my colleagues are going to come up with some great ones.
So I can share a couple, but I want to echo the unfortunate fact that I do think that a lot of our states and territories in DC and wherever else are going to be facing budget issues based on what's happening in DC right now, right? Um, and this is the place where I always tell April and Rachel that you can mute me if I start saying stuff I shouldn't say, because I'm very honest. One of the biggest challenges that we have, and I see this as a man in this field, is misogyny. A lot of people look at this work as women's work and therefore unimportant. And what I try to use, I guess I'll use the term male privilege, my male privilege to do is to speak to is to help get one and people in front of those who have power and helping them understand that this is not about gender even, although 98% of our providers are women. It's about the fact that we want the best for our children, and you cannot want the best for your children without wanting the best for the people caring and educating them. You know, it just doesn't make sense. And recognizing that, you know, whatever traditional values you have, if any of those values are truly family values, you must value the people working with and caring for your children. And anything else is, I'll use the word boulder dash because I probably shouldn't say bad words now. That's the first thing that I honestly see. On top of that, I think the other two big things that hit me are always to what Alexa said, it takes time, and that's hard on the field and the people who are working, because there are times where I've had I'm not gonna say brand new, but I'll say people who are really embracing this journey of being an advocate and starting to speak up for themselves, come back after a legislative session just defeated because we didn't win, or we didn't win what we wanted to win. And reminding them that, you know, unfortunately it's a marathon and not a sprint. And I know this isn't what we wanted, but let's look at what we did win or where we did get some movement, and let's keep moving forward, because if we just kind of, you know, become completely defeated, we'll never get where we want to get. And I think the last piece of that, which also goes with timing, and I'm looking at this from, this is very strategic and probably more so than just the organizing side, is I look at it as it's a hard life cycle when you're talking about childcare specifically, because for a lot of our elected officials, that's one election cycle for them. Like, you will figure it out within my election cycle, and then you won't care as much anymore. And families, when they move into the K-12 system here, you know, we do have those families that continue to advocate, but a lot of them kind of drop off because what's in front of me is what's in front of me. And I think some of our legislators know that, and they feel like they can get away with not addressing the issues because they know you'll find a way to make it work and you'll forget about it next time, which is part of our job as organizers to make sure that they are never feeling like that make sure that they see there is a group of people all over this Commonwealth that find this to be a problem and want solutions now. And even if their child has moved on, they still want for the next generation or their next kid. So those are some of the things that I see that are really challenging. This literal misogyny, the fact that our morale can drop when we don't get what we want. And then legislators who are being very political and saying, I've got a 4-year term. Your kid is 2. By the time you're angry now, but by the time I go up for re-election, you'll have moved on.
I want to add to that. I think both Alexa and Tyrone are spot on, and it's also racism. You know, because the majority of early childhood workers are women of color on top of being women. And, you know, throughout history, all of you know this, you all know that, you know, historically, women of color have been relied on to care for white kids. And, you know, a dish like early childhood child caring is the very second profession that has ever existed on this planet. And the first one is midwifery. And they are like who have been the women are also so undervalued when women are responsible for where we are today. I think so. I want to just highlight the racism piece in it. I think in Colorado, we have our own unique challenges where we have one of the most restrictive tax policies in the country. And because of that, we can't just legislatively raise revenue. We have to go to voters and ask, and who wants to vote yes when it says, shall we raise taxes on, you know? And so that's a constant battle. And then we also have, because of that, our state has a lot of silos where it's, well, no, we are going to bring a ballot initiative for mental health. Well, we're going to bring one for healthcare. Well, we're going to bring one for early childhood. We're going to bring one for K through 12, instead of all of us working together to change our tax code, which, that should be what we do. But, whatever. We're working on it. We're working on it. And so I think we also face the challenges, and Tyrone mentioned it, between the policy and the politics, right? Where you have, and I think this goes back to informing and training, preparing our community of like knowing if we're going to bring something forward, it could lose, and what is our bottom line? What are we willing to negotiate down to, and what are we not? What are our non-negotiables? And so having that up front and front and center before we engage in a campaign even helps to help like support our community leaders when they're talking to their neighbors and their friends. But the policy and the politics they should not be separated, but we all know that they are. We have lawmakers that are like, what is the bare minimum I need to do so that I can claim it's a win? And that is a lack of courage. That is such a lack of courage amongst the policymakers. It's so frustrating. And that's where you see the courage building in community to push them harder. Say, no, the bare minimum is not good enough for us. And so I think we have our fiscal policy that's handcuffing Colorado. Across the country, we have the policy versus politics, racism, misogyny. Like, it's just, but this work isn't for the faint of heart.
Yes, and thank you for naming those things. I know I see the chat blowing up, and we will get to, and I'm sure you all on the call will want to read the chat too, but we do have about 10 minutes to answer questions. So throw your questions in the chat. I do want to say, this is usually the time where people drop off. And you know what? This is not the time to drop off, because just like our amazing organizers organize others on a day-to-day basis, this right here is our opportunity to organize our collective action, our individual action, to meet this. We're no longer meeting the moment. The moment is here. So we are going to step into the moment and do the thing that you've been trying to do, and just make a small step. What email do you have to send? What introduction do you need? What training do you need to seek out for your board? What local event is happening? Day without childcare, is there things that you need to elevate? Like, the moment is here. So now is the time to kind of feel that urgency, because every day, I know these three people on this call, they feel like they wake up and they're like, we've got things to do. We got people to talk to. There's urgency in the air. And so it is our job on this call to meet that and help them and feel them. So what questions do you have you have this amazing panel of people that are here to help you move forward. And they want you to be just as honest with what your challenges are, because for all you know, they might debunk that very, very quickly and you can move forward. You were stuck for so long and then you're not stuck anymore. So be courageous, ask the questions. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to I know she has a starting question.
Well, hi everyone. The chat did just blow up, and we have a question that I think is interesting because it shows the breadth of people we have on this call. We have folks who are organizing their own days without childcare. We have folks who are in the funder community. We also have someone sitting in a federal office who's saying, how am I helping in my district when so much depends on local and state behavior? I'm feeling helpless and don't want folks to lose hope. We actually had another question in registration, very similar, saying, how do I partner with folks who are on the ground doing this work to lift up their voices into the conversation? Does anyone want to take that?
I can start with the pre-registered question if that works. I think the first thing is reach out to people. I think, and I think I can speak for others on this call. If you are sitting in a federal office or whatever, and you know of people doing things, or you can open a space so people can come speak to you, follow up. Like and I'm not accusing anybody because I don't know who's saying this, but one of the least effective things to do is have a town hall meeting, and that's that, right? And we know that things move slowly in the government, and we know that one office especially on a federal level, can't necessarily change everything because that might be one vote out of how many. But if you are saying, we want to know more, we want to hear from you, that's the first thing, and really listening and taking those voices in. And then my opinion, one of the things I find very helpful is then give us advice on what will work. Who do we need to talk to next? Who do we need to find partners in their district that could be in that cusp of could change their vote if necessary? I'm a very pragmatic person. I very much believe in, I know that we can change the world, but I know that it takes a long time. And I know that you have to have a plan to do it. So if you can co-strategize with us, help us plan, you'll see we have the energy and the people. Help us direct those people. If it's okay, this office agrees with you, and there's someone on the other side of the aisle who I can see kind of agrees but doesn't want to say anything, let us know. We'll send people there. We'll give them the cover. Because I think one of the things that is forgotten in national politics is everyone comes down to these two sides, and this side says this and this side says that, but both parties know that you still have to get reelected. And if your constituents are very much into an issue, even if it's not on your party's agenda, if you don't address it, there's a good chance that party loses a seat. And I think this is a place where you can use our energy to help push that forward. Because I'll speak for, in our state, we definitely have people who are supportive who said, I can't because, I'll get primary, the party will come after me. And, people were very clear, we'll primary you. Like we are the ones who voted you in. Like if you're worried about, you're thinking about a possible future, we're telling you right now you won't win. And that's a thing that has to be brought up sometimes.
I think this is a great time to remind any foundation folks in the audience that there's an incredible amount of work that organizers can do on the ground that is all 501c3 compliant in terms of building leadership skills, education for folks, all the things our folks have been talking about have pretty much been in the 501c3 space until you get to the point where you actually say, vote this way or that way, you're safe. So that's a really important thing to mention here. And then we do have, and feel free to ask questions here. I think we also talked about previously, so I'm going to throw this back to panel. Start thinking about your questions for others. If you have questions for the audience, we can also go that way. Someone is really interested in finding funding for childcare providers to stay open who are really having a challenge to stay open during this time where demand is sort of ebbing and flowing. People are losing jobs, and that's making the demand shifting in their community. Or perhaps the problem is that the rates that are being paid cannot keep up with inflation. I'm curious to know, are there things that you've been doing in your states and communities, and also if anyone on the call has been doing any type of special extra giving as a funder in your community to address these kinds of needs. Please do. Everyone wants to hear your ideas.
So
If I can, oh, go ahead, Alexa.
I was just real quick gonna say, I don't know of any like magical sources of funding to keep childcare centers open. What I would recommend and what we have done, we have had a number of centers closed this year. I would highly recommend engaging with that center to host legislators, state legislators, county commissioners to have a conversation about why their center is about to close. And the stories of the parents and the teachers and the kids who are going to have to go find other places so that it doesn't just, if it has to close, it doesn't close quietly. And we have done that. And in some cases, there's money that counties, the state can find to keep really critical centers open. So I would recommend starting on something like that.
I wanted to really quick address, Kate, I think you'd put in the question around not like making sure people don't lose hope. I think that is probably one of the hardest things right now. And not losing hope is important, but also not filling people with false hope is really important. And so when you are in district and when you are working in those communities, being upfront and honest first is always the best. I think asking and through like some of the things that we've seen here is there ways like, and again, this is about being creative and working within like your licensing part, like licensing in your state as well. Are there creative ways where licensing could actually be adjusted to help merge centers, you know, even if they're separate spaces, to like reduce overhead costs, for example? Like what are ways that through, let's say, like wealth building organizations, like we have a community wealth building organization that works directly with providers to help build co-ops and how to, you know, keep their organizations or streamline their funding and stuff like that, or their costs, excuse me. So I think those are some things that are good for all of us to dive into and look into in our own states. As you know, in this period, I mean, I think it's going to be devastating. And I think that's, you know, we're going to see a lot of licensed childcare centers close, and we're going to see the reliance on FFN care increase dramatically. And the funding and the support for FFN care to be trained up and to be offering high quality care is like less in Colorado. It's less than 1%, even if FFN care makes up more than 50% of the care in the state. You know, so there's we're seeing this, we're gonna see this shift. But I think hopefully before we see that shift, I think it's really looking at like how do we adjust our licensing to help some of these centers merge, combine, do whatever they can so that they can stay open.
That's a really interesting take on it, Lorena. And I think you and Alexa could have a whole conversation around licensing based on what is coming up in this conversation. And maybe ECSC and RCCF should host a conversation around that in the future. One other thing I don't want to ignore, and as that came in that we didn't directly address is this issue that, you know, in the past, a lot of people have argued for expansion of childcare and early childhood on the basis of like there's going to be an improvement in child outcomes. And she was pointing out that there's a lot of problems with the implementation because the folks that are actually, because of our system, the folks who are actually providing the care are often dealing with the same trauma or living in poverty and having other emotional challenges because of just the reality of what's going on in the country right now. And so that is a factor that we need to really think about. So how do you factor that in? This whole idea of we're paying, you know, half the population of the workforce is eligible for various kinds of public supports, which are also potentially going to be cut. What are your thoughts on that?
So I can say very quickly, you know, I always liken that to the idea if you have like a personal trainer who's supposed to get you in shape, and that trainer has no access to healthy food themselves, and they're eating candy bars and ice cream all day, their training of you is going to go down the tubes because they're not going to be healthy as they want to be, and they're not going to be able to give you what they're supposed to. It's the same thing. If we're not giving our teachers what they need, you know, it's they used to tell you that, you know, you should leave your problems at the door when you come to work. But if I'm afraid my lights are going to be cut off, that's not a problem I can leave at my doorstep, you know, coming into my childcare facility to work. I'm worried that I'm going to go home to no power, or I'm worried that I'm going to be hungry tonight, or my own kids are going to be hungry tonight. So I think the basic honest human answer is start treating our teachers like human beings and recognize that, you know, you used to hear the expression, the dignity of work. The dignity of work is only there if there's dignity of pay. Make sure that our folks can afford a basic living. I've never met a childcare teacher that asked for a private jet, but I've met some that have asked, can I not be on the assistance program to keep my heat on? So I think that's an important thing just to recognize. And I see Lorena's gone well, so I'll pass the mic over.
Just wanted to just one thing also is you know, there's a larger conversation we need to have on the validity of evidence-based programming. And how evidence-based programming can either be updated or, you know, once it's done, and everyone thinks that's like the Bible of the evidence-based program for decades to come, when that's not actually true. And I say that as a director of an organization that has an evidence-based program, and we are wrestling with how do we redo this? How do we make sure that what we're doing is still relevant to today? And so I think that just you know, in addition to what Tyrone was saying, which is very real, it's just also like when can we recognize that evidence base is also rooted in our, you know, white supremacy and racist systems, and what do we do about that? I don't know. Chew on it. Let me know when you figure it out.
Well, once again, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank April for moderating this, and thank our audience for joining this very stimulating conversation. We went all over, and encourage people to take a look at our report. Keep the conversation going through our social media with the Raising Child Care Fund. Follow up with our grantee partners who are on this call, and we hope you have a wonderful day.